Okay, let's start this. Welcome to Portland State, and on behalf of the Spanish section in the World Language Department of Portland State, I would like to welcome you to this event this morning. First of all, I would like to thank a very generous donor who has made possible this event happen. I would also like to thank the chair of the department who support this event academically but also financially as well. And so we are here to talk a little bit about the Amazon, what is going on over there. And it seems remote, but it's not that remote actually. And for that, we have Professor José Mazzotti from Tufts University. Professor José Mazzotti is a leading scholar in the field of colonial studies, Latin American colonial studies. He has published several groundbreaking books on the 16th century, especially related to Inca Garcilaso de la Vega. The list is very overwhelming, so I won't mention how many publications he has put out there, but I would like to mention, for example, Incan Insights, El Inca Garcilaso Hints to Andine Readers from 2008, Poéticas del Flujo, Migración y Violencia Verbales en el Perú de los años 80. Some editions that he has done are very important and maybe interesting for a broad public, like the other Latinos, Central and South American in the United States. And well, he is also a very renowned poet from the 80s generation in Peru, and he will be this night as well reading some poems in a bilingual event on Modern Foucault's book shop, I think it's called. Right? It's on Morrison, so you of course, I welcome to join us, and it will be, I think, a very poetic event in night. So, without anything else, I would like to welcome Professor Mazzotti, and let's start this event. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, thank you so much for being here this morning. And thank you to Professor Enrique Cortés for this generous presentation, and Professor Gina Greco, Chair of the Department of World Languages and Literatures, who has made the huge mistake of inviting me, because I feel overwhelmed and humbled with this nice opportunity to talk to you about some of my recent research. As you know, I'm going to talk about mix of origin and survival, the Iskonawa of the Peruvian Amazon. The Iskonawa is an endangered community that many specialists consider gone until recent research documented their language and culture. There are very few speakers alive, but they still hold a world of knowledge and oral tradition that a team of Peruvian researchers has been collecting since 2012. Some of these Iskonawa myths of origin and survival tell us about their relationship with nature, their use of animals and plants, and the bleak future of deforestation, contamination, crime, and drug trafficking. The project, funded by the National Science Foundation, is already in its final stages and includes the publication of the first collection of oral tradition of this forgotten community in Amazon. And this is actually the cover that just went to the print yesterday. The compilers are myself and two of my co-investigators, Roberto Sariquea from Lima and Catalina Rodriguez Alza, an anthropologist also from Peru. The Iskonawa oral tradition is full of knowledge about nature and survival strategies that speak volumes about the environment and the possibility of coexistence between among animals and nature and human beings. However, like most indigenous societies in Latin America, the Iskonawa is in danger of disappearing. This case study also sheds light on some texts of the Peruvian literary tradition and challenges some premises of post-colonial and decolonial theory, as we will see. Let's start with a few basic concepts. The Amazon rainforest covers an area of over 2 million square miles, and is estimated to host over 300 indigenous languages and their corresponding ethnic groups. Here's a partial map of some of those indigenous languages. In Peru, there's nearly 50. In Brazil, there's nearly 180. Similar numbers in southern Colombia and Ecuador, and the 9 countries that share this huge territory. Only in Brazil, as I mentioned, there's around 200 of these communities, 60 of which are in voluntary isolation. In Peru, there are 17 linguistic families and around 50 indigenous languages, at least 10 of which are in imminent danger of disappearance in the next few years due to rapid deforestation, contamination, cultural contact, and forced migration. The Iskonawa is one of those languages. My work with the small community that still speaks it in the Peruvian jungle cannot be made without a serious and comprehensive documentation of its culture. As opposed to traditional linguistics and anthropology, language and cultural documentation implies first a large amount of audiovisual data that serves as a bank of information for future researchers. No documentation team can presume to record all cultural manifestations in a given community, however small it is. Much less can presume to produce a total and detailed description and analysis of that culture. A documentation project of endangered cultures may include a grammar and a lexicon, like for example, this book that came out last year is the first vocabulary of the Iskonawa language. But in general, a documentation project has to be interdisciplinary in nature and also very ambitious, especially when it includes a revitalization component that has a direct impact on the life of the community. I started to work on this project in 2010. At that time, I was looking for a research interest beyond literary and historical analysis, which is what I have been doing most of my professional life. Going back to my juvenile years as a linguist and talking to all professors and colleagues in Lima, we decided to find out about a language that it was not certain it had completely disappeared. The Iskonawa language is an almost extinct variety of the Pano family in the Amazonian basin of the Pucallpa area and the Sierra del Divisor mountain chain near the border with Brazil. The area is, I don't know if I have a, here. This is the city of Pucallpa, which is one of the largest cities in the Peruvian central and central Amazon area. And the specific zone where the Iskonawa inhabit is near the border with Brazil, around the Rio Calleria, as you can see here. It's like a few hours by boat from Pucallpa. The Sierra del Divisor is mountain chain which divides the Peruvian and Brazilian territories, as you can see. It's a privileged area because of its unique volcanic origin, with mountains reaching up to 3,000 feet and numerous thermal waterfalls, a condition favoring what biologists call the rapid process of speciation. That means that given the variety of climates and soil in this area, there are the species that are only found on this zone of the Amazon, as opposed to many of the other thousands of species cataloged and non-cataloged that still live in the Amazon basin. And just as a footnote, we must remember that only 50% of all those species have been studied and cataloged by biologists or environmentalists. There is still another 50% of animals, plants, trees that we don't know much about. So it would be a huge loss to see the process of deforestation advance as it has been happening in the last few decades. And here are a few pictures of the Sierra del Divisor, just so you have an idea of the area where the Iskonawa have lived traditionally. This is a beautiful mountain in the triangular form. Thermal waterfalls, a huge variety of birds, transparent fish, a very handsome kind of monkey called a mono guapo, eatable worms. It's a huge protein source for natives in the area. So, the Iskonawa language has been poorly documented, and it is increasingly being replaced by both the Shipibo-Conibo language, also from the Pano family, and obviously by Spanish. And because of this extreme vulnerability and the real risk that they will disappear in the next generation, the Iskonawa case is a sad example of the ongoing process of colonization in the Amazon. It constitutes modern evidence of the failure of post-colonial states in countries with large indigenous populations, as is the case of Peru, with its approximately 7 million indigenous inhabitants, constituting 24% of the entire population. I began doing research in this community with a multidisciplinary team of researchers, including the already mentioned Professor Roberto Sariquet and a renowned linguist Rodolfo Sarron Palomino, both from Peru. We have also been able to secure a few research assistants to aid in the collection and formatting of data. So in July 2010, I planned a visit to the community of Chachibay, located approximately 8 hours by boat from Yarinacocha, the lakeside port of the city of Pucallpa. Chachibay is the name of an ancient Iskonawa chief who was also an important curandero, or medicine man. While both Iskonawas and Shipibos inhabited this town, the place name indicates that the indigenous community of Chachibay had been home to a number of Iskonawa families. And here we have a picture of the entrance to Chachibay. Here are some of the inhabitants of Iskonawa descent. I won't explain who are these people, but the woman that you see here, the oldest one, is one of the last survivors and speakers of the language. Her name is Doña Nelita. The history of the Iskonawa people is tragic and saddening. According to Luis Whiton and André Marcel Dant, two anthropologists of the 1960s, the Iskonawa are the last remnants of a larger group called the Remo that were gradually expelled from western Brazil and killed by neighboring tribes and modern caucheros or robber privateers in the early 20th century. The Iskonawa called themselves the Iskobakebu, but started to use their current name more frequently after 1959. That year, Protestant missionaries from the South American Mission, or SAM, tracked the non-contacted Iskonawa and convinced 24 of them to leave the jungle. The missionaries relocated those 24 Iskonawa from the upper Utiquinia River to the current Shipibo community of Calleria. The original name, Iskobakebu, is a compound word formed by the roots isko, a type of bird, the oriole, and bake, or child, to which the collective plural suffix bu has been added. Those Iskobakebu, or Iskonawa, who were not relocated and their descendants constitute today a community in voluntary isolation of probably around 100 members. So literally, Iskobakebu means children of the oriole bird. I'm going to explain why, and I want to go to one of the myths of foundation of the community related to this bird. So in terms of field research, this is a privileged situation. We get to work on the language of an isolated community, but without having direct contact with them, just with members of the group that were assimilated and their children and grandchildren. The Iskonawa who work with us are basically trilingual. They speak Iskonawa, especially the elders, Shipibo, and also Spanish. Iskonawa is not yet extinct, but it will be soon. André Dans, a French anthropologist, registered only 20 speakers in 1973. Other linguists and anthropologists like Matorella, Brabec de Mori, and so on, have identified a few Iskonawa speakers dispersed among the Shipibo communities on the borders of the Calleria River, one of the Ucayalis affluents. And here, you can go back to the map. So you have an idea of that geographical area. This is central Peru, the Ucayali department, and here the city of Pucallpa, and again, the area of the Iskonawa, the region of Iskonawa is here between Peru and Brazil. Despite the existence of a few Iskonawa speakers, a handful of modern scholars who have approached them provide only some cultural and historical, but not linguistic description. We are left only with short vocabularies totaling nearly 100 words combined. Our project is filling this gap in the knowledge, and because most Iskonawas have to speak Shipibo in order to survive in their host communities, we also measure the degree of linguistic interference. We identified at least 14 native speakers, 5 of them completely fluent. They are the last survivors of the group of 24 that split from the main community in 1959. The other identified speakers of Iskonawa have an intermediate to minimal command of the language. They live within Shipibo larger communities in scattered caseríos or small farms along the Calleria River, in the communities of Calleria, San Miguel, and Guacamayo, and in the cities of Pucallpa and Tingo María. So I met Doña Nelita Campos Rodriguez, her original name is Nahuanica in Iskonawa, who is around 70 years old. 70 years, she's an Iskonawa woman, originally born and raised among hunters and gatherers in the 1950s. And I was able to converse with her in Spanish. Doña Nelita was born in the old Iskonawa village near the head of the Utiquinia River, some 70 miles east of the Calleria community, where she was living in 2010. My initial contact with Doña Nelita allowed me to map the situation of the surviving Iskonawa. Then, a year later, here's Doña Nelita again. In August 2011, Roberto Saliquei, my co-investigator and a specialist in Pano languages, you can see him in the middle of the picture, traveled again to the area. We met with Doña Nelita, her son Felipe, and 4 of her grandchildren, here is the process of documentation, who are now in their late teens. This second trip allowed both of us, Roberto Saliquei and myself, to confirm that Iskonawa still exists as an independent language, although it already presents some traces of language attrition. Doña Nelita and her family were able to complete several lists of vocabulary. She also produced complete sentences and narrated some passages of her personal life. Doña Nelita also told a popular tale about a local bird in Iskonawa, to which I will refer later. All this material was immediately translated into Spanish and compared to Shipibo with the help of the informants. After collecting over 200 lexical entries, many simple and compound sentences, and samples of oral narrative, we were able to verify that Iskonawa still keeps its own grammatical and phonological features. We also learned that the surviving Iskonawa of the area constantly moved to the town of Chachibay, where they still have chacras or orchards. Besides the economic interest they have in Chachibay, their goal is to congregate there in order to boost their life, the life of their language, and keep their ethnic identity alive. They fear that Shipibo families living in Chachibay may overpower them and expel them from the traditional town. They understand that at least some sporadic presence in Chachibay would be the best way to keep the members of the Iskonawa community together and to defend their rights along the log privateers, against the log privateers that now abound in the area. The initial field work demonstrated the feasibility of the project, so we presented it to the National Science Foundation and we received a grant in 2012. Our original idea was to complete the project in 3.5 years from July 2012 to December 2015, but different circumstances delayed the completion of the project until this year, 2018. During the first year of the project, in 2012, we traveled to the area to help set up the basic infrastructure of the project and work closely with the community in the initial compilation of recordings and raw material, as well as in the training of young members of the community in basic techniques of data compilation. During the second and third years of the project, the team has returned to Chachibay to complete data recording and continue the training of the young speakers. Like for example, in this case, we were able to bring some of the Iskonawa to Lima, to the Catholic University of Lima, which is the partner institution we work with, to train them in computer software related to data transcription of linguistic recording. This training part included a travel for 10 of Iskonawa members to attend a seminar, as I mentioned, and the team, the original team of researchers, is still working on the completion of the database, including an archive with lexical specificities and the oral history materials that will serve as future references for native speakers and researchers. Just to conclude about the project in general, and then I will go on the myths of origin. I have to mention the specific goals of the project. As you can see, a database and a website with linguistic and ethnohistorical and environmental information. In fact, there are already 3 sites that if you want to investigate the AIDIA, is the Archive of Indigenous Languages of Latin America, based at the University of Texas, Austin, the Archivo de Lenguas Peruanas, or Archive of Peruvian Languages at the Catholic University in Lima, and in my own institution, Tufts University, at the Tisch Library website, there's also a depository of recordings and also the grammar, the lexicon, and in a few weeks, the oral tradition volume. Then a second goal is the publications that I already mentioned, the training of the students, both from Lima and Tufts, in language documentation. Like for example, a few students that were able to travel to the area. Training of native speakers in the preservation and revitalization of the Iskonawa language, and most importantly, the empowerment of the Iskonawa community, because the project is not only just getting information from these informants, but also returning to them some means, even material means, like for example, chainsaws, boats, legal counsel, in order to help them to defend themselves both economically and legally for the authorities. These materials, the material of the documentation project, are also being disseminated through a dedicated webpage available to both specialists and the general public. We anticipate that our research projects will be a first step in preserving the language and culture of the Iskonawa people. And our long-term goal is to develop local resources to participate in much-needed language revitalization, thus preserving the linguistic diversity of the region and providing scholars with additional insight into the intersections of language and culture. So, going back to the big picture, Peru is the territory of approximately 19 different linguistic families. The Quechua family that you can see there in red is the larger area. It's the so-called language of the Incas, but it's actually a family. So there are different varieties of Quechua from the north or the south that are as different as Spanish and French, maybe within the Romance languages family. There's also the Aymara family, which is a much smaller, in Peru at least, area in southern Peru, but it's mostly the language still spoken in Bolivia. It's actually the language of Evo Morales. And 17 Amazonian families, only in Peru, which you can see in different colors, with a largely understudied linguistic variety. And the blue spot that you see in the central part of the map, this is the Pano family, to which Iskonawa belongs. So the Quechua and Aymara families each include a set of linguistic variables that are languages in their own right. The Amazonian families include the Pano, Jíbaro, Bora, Tucano, Huitoto, Arawak, and other families or languages, each with different degrees of complexity, their own specific languages and distinctive grammatical features. For example, in the case of the Pano family, the blue spot, at least 17 out of 30 registered languages are still spoken in the central east area of Peru and the central west area of Brazil. Iskonawa is one of those Pano languages, And as I mentioned before, there are still 5 elders who speak Iskonawa fluently and 9 others who speak it partially. These individuals form part of the contacted Iskonawa group, the few who remain so long after the forced relocations and assimilation. However, according to a 1995 report by IDC Ucayali, which is an indigenous organization, the acronym stands for Inter-Ethnic Development Association of the Peruvian Rainforest. In addition to the non-Iskonawa people who live in Chachibay and on the shores of the Calleria River, according to this organization, there were still around 100 members in complete isolation, distributed in 21 families. So this is a picture taken a few years ago from the air of isolated, or it's better to say in voluntary isolation, because complete isolation is probably not there anymore. You can observe here, for example, in this picture, that this young person holds a machete. She looks like a girl. What is a machete doing there? It's probably the product of the contact, intermittent contact that some of these communities in voluntary isolation have with loggers. Mainly, they go to their camps and extract some tools for their survival, but they don't want still to have any continuous contact with Westerners for many reasons. We're definitely in favor of that distance, because they could easily be killed by viruses or bacteria. They don't have immunity against them. So, in 1998, the Peruvian government created the Iskonawa Territorial Reservation, which consists of 2,700 hectares at the head of the rivers Abujao, Utiquinia, and Calleria. Specifically, this area here that you see around the city of Pucallpa with number 5. This is a map of the so-called non-contacted groups, of some of the non-contacted groups in the Peruvian territory. It is possible that there are other Iskonawa families living in isolation on the Brazilian side as well. For obvious legal, sanitary, and ethical reasons, we cannot contact those voluntarily isolated members of the Iskonawa group. The prestigious journal Ethnologue mentions 82 speakers in 2000, but it is not clear if those are the non-contacted members of the Iskonawa ethnic group. Our direct experience in the area points to the lower number of 14, at least in terms of known speakers with different degrees of competency. While this small group of speakers is sufficient for documenting the phonology, syntax, lexicon, and oral tradition of the Iskonawa language, it provides evidence that immediate preservation of this data is crucial. Very little was known about the Iskonawa language. Some of the Shipibo speakers that we consulted claimed that they could barely understand the Iskonawas when they spoke in their dialect, they said. However, from the few lexical examples that linguists have managed to compile, there do seem to be an important number of cognates between Iskonawa, the Iskonawa language, and the Shipibo language, in part owing to genetic reasons and the prolonged contact between the two languages. Our conclusion is that there is an overlap of around 60% between the two languages, pretty much the degree of similarity between Spanish and Portuguese. In regard to Iskonawa oral tradition, linguists Radek Mori and Perez Casapilla refer to a type of song or chant called Yoamai, which healing curanderos or shamans utilize in rituals to ward off the evils plaguing their patients. Also important to an understanding of Iskonawa oral culture is the list that Luis Whiton compiled in 1961 of the names of various Iskonawa divinities and their associations with particular beings, plants, animals, or forces of nature. During our conversation in 2010, Doña Nelita Campos acknowledged her familiarity with a number of these divinities and was able to offer her own interpretation of their characteristics. For example, Doña Nelita was able to identify names like Yoshi, the spirit of demon, Wakan, a good spirit of water, Rumu, the spirit of tobacco, Hawan, a good spirit of the sky, and Kaboko, an evil water spirit. and to describe the principal features of these spirits. In one of our visits to Chachibai in 2013, she offered a moving testimony of her hard life and a short popular tale about a bird, the Isko or Oriole, influenced Iskonawa. We have collected more than 50 tales about animals, the origin of natural phenomena, how humans started to use plants, and so on. Today, I will concentrate on the telling of the Oriole tale, and then relate this kind of narrative to the revitalization aspect of the project. I will also relate the tale to a branch of Peruvian literature that looks to indigenous forms of knowledge as the source of its aesthetic and ideological agenda. Here is the tale, and so it will be easy to follow it because there's more maps of the Iskonawa Territorial Reserve. Actually, before going to the tale of the Oriole, you can see that the area in violet color is the area of the traditional Iskonawa people, but the indigenous reserve created by the Peruvian government only tends to have that territory. So it is presumed that in this other area between Peru and Brazil, there are still Iskonawas living in voluntary isolation. Okay, let's go to the tale. And this is easy to follow. I'll read it aloud. One night, a curious man thought, we should go and sack the nest of the Oriole. He then took his tobacco to clean his body with the help of Hannibal, a medicine man, a sorcerer, or Yushinya. The curious man cleaned his body to be able to see the Oriole. His son told him, let's go and sack the nest of the Oriole. He has all kinds of peanuts. The father responded, we should ask the Oriole. He added, the Oriole is wild. He had seen him in his cleansing process. The son insisted to go, so they walked for 2 days. They were 6 Iskonawa in total, the curious guy and his 5 sons. The naughty one insisted the most to go and talk back to his father. They took corn flour with them. The 5 children went ahead and the father stayed behind. The sons arrived first to the nest of the Oriole. The father had told them, wait for me to see how the Oriole is doing. But the Oriole was listening to the conversation. The naughty son disobeyed and said, I'm going to see by myself. His brothers tried to dissuade him. Don't go, wait for father. But he didn't listen and went by himself. And here is a picture of an actual Oriole nest hanging from a palm tree. So let's go back to the tale, the second part. The peanut plant is a tall and big old bush. When the Oriole saw the mischievous son, it started to sing Titsakuturu, Ashtakuturu, which means I will release my yellow feather, I will throw it down below. Then the bird killed the man with a feathered spear in his head. The curious man saw his dead son. The brothers cried. They were sad. Then the curious man became friends with the Oriole. He brought tobacco and aspired it. Don't do anything to me. We're family. Don't kill me. The Oriole shook its feathers. They started to talk. We came to ask for your peanuts, the curious man said. The Oriole accepted. Then it sang, Kuskat Kudurus, Tris Kuturus, Huitis Kuturus, which means, I will bring rain to put off any fire. The Oriole explained the different types of peanuts. This is Mankutama, this is Heustama, this is Wishtatama. He tells the man, plant the peanut. After you do that, you harvest the peanut and make peanut chicha or beer. Men planted the peanut and women made the chicha. But when they planted, nothing grew up. So they rested in their hammocks all day during 1-2 months. Then the peanuts grew. They were big and they made chicha and also ate. The Oriole explains to the curious man, when you harvest, cut the peanuts with a big stick, rolling it over the plant. The peanuts come from there. Then he told the man, go and plant tashikari, yellow sweet potato, and nawankari, white sweet potato. And then he showed him the 2 types of sweet potato to plant. So the curious man planted these sweet potatoes. The Oriole told him, when the plants grow, invite your entire family, don't be cheap with them. When the sweet potatoes grew, the women went to the orchard and found huge sweet potatoes. They took them to the house and cooked them, and all the family and the children ate. So this is the myth of foundation of the Iskonawa people. Here's a short analysis. This myth of origin presents some of the most common elements found in the oral traditions by many Amazon cultures. For example, communication between humans and sacred or primordial animals requires some sort of spiritual alteration that begins with the cleansing of the body in order to consume tobacco. As contradictory as this may sound, the process implies a fast of several days before consuming tobacco or any other substance, like a more usual ayahuasca or yagé, a compost of free skins and herbs with hallucinogenic effects. The myth of the oral creates a timeless context wherein communication between humans and animals seems normal. Given this premise, the curious man can embark upon the kind of search for knowledge traditionally attributed to animals. Similarly, the primordial time referenced in the narration can reoccur in the present time during specific activities, hunting being one important example. When a member of the community goes out to hunt, he traditionally recites a designated prayer asking for the animal's forgiveness. In the myth of the Oriole, there are two different models of conduct. On the one hand, there is the disobedient son acting without any respect for his father or for the Oriole, and this will remind us of contemporary privateers and loggers. And then, on the other hand, there is the understanding father correcting his son's mistake and easily making peace with the Oriole by showing respect. The respectful approach is effective because it does not alter the well-being of the bird or its surroundings. What is more, the Oriole, in addition to providing the humans with peanut seeds and the knowledge of how to process them, also provides them with sweet potatoes and even advises them about social norms of conduct, suggesting that they privilege the communal enjoyment of the harvest. Rather than seeking revenge for his son's death, the father understands the danger of provoking a powerful force of nature and chooses to protect the rest of his family and his community at large by negotiating the terms of his communication with the Oriole. The myth shows that there is a form of knowledge that can be shared between living beings towards a peaceful coexistence. It does not question the authority of the Oriole. Rather, it acknowledges that the bird can teach much to humans and that the bird will even give more than what is asked for if humans respect the Oriole's well-being. There is no way of knowing how old this myth is. Doña Nelita and her aunt, Doña Juana, here she is, both recall this tale as they were remembering their childhood in the rainforest. It may very well date back hundreds of years to the original Iskonawa community, which had inhabited its territory since pre-Hispanic times, as is the case with most Amazonian communities in voluntary isolation today. There are many other aspects of his origin myth to explore, but at this point, I would like to focus on how such tales have nurtured modern Indian literature, providing what Mircea Eliade would call mythical thought, and which contemporary decolonial studies refer to as indigenous episteme. Let me refer briefly to the cases of two Peruvian writers, José María Arguedas and César Cabo. In terms of the epistemological and ontological categories present in the oral myth, and which are also pivotal in Quechua oral tradition, José María Arguedas in 1966 published his now celebrated poem Hook Dr. Punaman Kayan, also known as Llamado a algunos doctores, or An Appeal to Some Learned Doctors. Here, Arguedas carries out a brilliant defense of indigenous cultural identity and of the relationship between humans and nature in the indigenous world. He writes, and I will quote in English, this is only the Spanish version, but I'm going to read the English translation, that says, 500 potato flowers grow on the balconies of the abysses that your eyes cannot reach, on the land where night and gold, silver and day intertwine. Those 500 flowers are my brain, my flesh. The feathers of the condors of the small birds have turned into rainbows and shine. The 100 flowers of the quinoa that I saw upon the summits, bold in color under the sun, the black wing of the condor has turned into a flower. In this cold land, I plant quinoa of 100 colors, of 100 types of powerful seed. The 100 colors are also my soul, my relentless eyes. The speaker, who in other parts of the poem identifies himself as a plural subject, interchangeably using I and we, here transforms himself into multiple elements, some minimal, some grandiose, but all interconnected by their belonging to the natural world. In that universe, that subject of the poem finds a knowledge that identifies him as part of that world. He learns from that knowledge and gets nurtured by it. It is from the perspective of that knowledge that he can challenge the supposedly modernizing and scientific knowledge of the doctors to whom he addresses the poem. Scholars who come from distant lands assuming they know everything about Andean culture, but fail to recognize the importance of the environment as part of indigenous identity. Roxana Molinier, in her essay For a Poetics of Recognition, argues that Arguedas's poem challenges the traditional recognition of the other. That is, Arguedas is not claiming that indigenous thought be recognized because of its resemblance to Western episteme. Rather, Arguedas insists that indigenous knowledge be recognized for its power to transform Western preconceptions about human beings in nature, inhabiting two separate universes in a hierarchical order where the human realm reigns supreme. Going to another case, César Calvo, in his book Las Tres Mitades de Inomoxo y Otros Grupos de la Amazonía, or the Three Halves of Inomoxo and Other Sources from the Amazon, constitutes another important attempt to express an indigenous worldview. In this specific case, that of the Ashanican ethnic group of the Peruvian jungle. This is a heterogeneous book in which the personal story of the protagonist, the poet César Calvo himself, intermingles with the story of Inomoxo, a shaman whose name means Black Panther. Inomoxo was the son of a robber privateer kidnapped at an early age by the Ashaninka so he could be raised in their culture. Because he was white, the Ashanikans believed that Inomoxo would be better able to defend their rights and their culture. The plot consists of Calvo's search for Inomoxo, a paternal figure who will teach the poet the most profound secrets of the Amazon and how to achieve personal happiness. This book, originally published in 1981 and still largely ignored by conventional literary criticism, has many redeeming qualities which I could discuss at length. However, here let me just quote two short paragraphs that suggest the importance of Calvo's book to my own project of cultural documentation. I'll read the English translation only. Not only resound the many, many animals that you have seen, that you have not seen, that will never be seen by anyone, bugs that learn to think and converse like people, the plants and vegetables resound as well. And above all, resound the footsteps of the animals that one was before being human, the footsteps of the stones and plants and things that each human being has been. These two short passages present an animistic and humanizing concept of nature, one in which animals and plants, as potential human beings, learn how to communicate with people in a non-hierarchical way. Inomoxo, the shaman, has achieved a form of wisdom that breaks apart the more traditional notions of the real maravilloso or magical realism, two styles of narratives that tend to incorporate irrational elements within a more general framework of normality. In contrast, the literature that attempts to reproduce mythical thought dismantles the Western notion of rationality, along with its presupposed opposition between culture and nature. Both Arguedas and Calvo represent a particular approach to indigenous forms of knowledge, and one that is primarily accessible through field research alone. Returning then to the oral tale, it seems to me that the recollection and documentation of such stories offers an example of how to revitalize a language and culture, since it is the elders who recount the myths of origin that the younger generations then learn. Members of endangered cultures are usually very interested in their own oral tradition, and through the remembrance of these stories, the elders can pass on the knowledge about traditional ways to maintain a good relationship with the environment. The involvement of native speakers in the process of data collection proves even more valuable when they act as agents and not just as objects of study. The training of native speakers in data recording and transcription enables the project participants to engage more personally and professionally with the native speakers, thus gaining more access to their daily life. At the end of this project, they will be qualified to help with some recordings and will learn the basic phonetic literacy of their own language and enhance their knowledge of their own tradition. This achievement will help to slow the rapid process of disappearance of their language by being able to transcribe more material in the future for educational purposes within their community. And just to finish, the knowledge gained through the documentation and study of Iskonawa contributes in general terms to the field of linguistics as a whole, and in particular to the preservation of endangered languages. It also helps to preserve a vast legacy of cultural production in the form of songs, rituals, dances, and especially oral narratives, thus contributing to the fields of literary studies and cultural studies. The grammar outlined, which has been published a couple of years ago, follows all international standards of phonetic notation, phonological classification, and morphologic and syntactic analysis. The lexicon has around 1,600 entries covering most aspects of the culture and social life of the studied community. And in compiling a selection of oral narratives and video recordings, we take into consideration their accessibility to a broad sector of the general public, an accessibility that will help assure the preservation of the rich cultural legacy of this indigenous community. However, and unfortunately, the imminent threat of deforestation and contamination of the Amazon basin will mean the disappearance of entire ethnic nations and the millenary knowledge of how to preserve the environment and use it in a sustainable way. Some of the challenges are, as you can see, logging, both legal and illegal, mining, particularly gold mining, which leaves a lot of toxins, the rivers, oil exploration and extraction, and so on. As I was saying, one cannot approach this reality with the assumption that the processes of colonization ended 200 years ago. On the contrary, these processes have accelerated over the past 30 years with the implementation of economic policies that facilitate exploitation of natural resources, spurred on by a hierarchical mentality that privileges progress over nature and Westerners over natives. Despite whatever claims can be made by post-colonial or decolonial theories, the fact remains that without true knowledge of the culture of endangered communities, there is little that activists and academics can do. And in the field of literature, authors such as Arguedas and Calvo will become increasingly exceptional unless literary criticism engages the task of exploring other disciplines and embarking upon true and meticulous field research. I hope this talk may inspire some of you in joining me in this effort. And just before I finish, I just want to treat you. Let's hope the internet connection is working. This is one of the many samples of songs and dances that the Iskonawa people perform for us. It's already on YouTube. Let's see if we can. Oh, we can marvel, unfortunately. Anyway, to turn out one. Let's froze. Never mind, it's easy to get if you go to YouTube and look for Iskonawa dance, and you'll find it. It's only a minute and a half, but it's very charming. This is a song of goodbye that three of the elders of the Iskonawa community perform before camera for the first time. You will have a sense of the sounds of the language and also the rhythms. So, since this is Oh, they're having fun. And the last slide is just to say goodbye. Thank you very much. I think there is some time for questions.
So thank you, Professor Mazzotti. We have half an hour actually. We would like to engage in a conversation, further more information, make suggestions or comments as well. That would be very welcome as well. So,
Yes, please.
Are there musical instruments associated with the song and dance?
No, not that we were able to see in this context specifically. No. The ladies that we just, let me turn the volume up a little bit. Yeah, the ladies that we saw dancing, they don't play instruments basically because they are not in their original environment. We assume that yes, in the community in voluntary isolation, there are kinds of drums that we were able to hear about, rattles, mostly basic percussion instruments, but that's it.
I wonder, this is one tribe, a small tribe in one part of Peru. You said there were 150 tribes in Brazil, 60 more in Peru.
Exactly.
I wonder if you could paint a picture of the total effort to preserve these other cultures, also the whole complex of efforts
Yeah, it is
to preserve
estimated.
these indigenous cultures.
Sure. It is estimated that to document a language in the process of disappearances, in the case of Iskonawa, you need at least $250,000 in order to buy the equipment, hire the professionals, pay the informants, more or less. Very few dollars go into this kind of project from the Peruvian, the Brazilian, or the Colombian states. They have other priorities. And that's unfortunately what is going on in this process of neoliberal and neo-colonial economies that are prevalent in contemporary Latin America. So some of these languages are disappearing. It was in 1988, Inés Posiscot, a renowned linguist, who said that there are 60 indigenous languages in Peru. But a report from the Ministry of Education in 2013, so only 15 years later, stated that there were 47 languages still existing and alive. My suspicion is that there is a few more that haven't been documented or that are thought that have disappeared, but because of the lack of documentation, we don't know much about them. So the efforts, unfortunately, on the official state side are almost non-existent. A few linguists try to do something from the ministries of education of Peru or Brazil, but it's not enough. The process of disappearance is much faster than any efforts. So there are international agencies like the Volkswagen Foundation, the NSF, and others that fund projects, but they're still not enough. For example, in Peru, I've only heard in the last 10 years of 2 of these projects. One of the Iskonawa, which is the project that I work in, and the Ururua recently granted an amount of funds to linguists Cecilia Venezuela in the University of California, she's in one of the campuses, Davis, whatever. But that's it. Just to go back to Peru, if we have at least 47 languages, probably more, we would need to document some of those languages, at least 10, 15 more projects like this. For a transnational or a huge corporation, we multiply a $250,000 by 10, it's only $2.5 million. But still, money is not coming. We have to do more effort, we have to fundraise and advocate for this kind of initiative. And also try to understand the business world and the corporate world how important it is to preserve or at least document languages that are disappearing, because each language has a world of knowledge about not only nature but also about forms of relationship between human beings and nature that ultimately will benefit all the human species by preserving more of these plants, animals, and forms of social organization and oral tradition. We all benefit in the long run. Yes?
Could you expand a bit on something you talked about at the end, which was the limitations of post-colonial and decolonial theory, like in relation to a project like this?
Of course.
I'm just interested in that sort of more about maybe the pitfalls you see in those orientations and how a project like this is different.
Okay, thank you. Well, that allows me to expand on the footnote because it would be the subject of a whole different talk, but I'll try to summarize the idea. When I mentioned post-colonial and decolonial theories, I was referring specifically to some of the well-known thinkers of the last 30 years that have applied these theoretical frameworks to the study of Latin American literature and cultures. To begin with, post-colonial theory, as we all know, it has a non-Latin American origin. It's a theoretical framework based on the colonial experience of India and Africa, mostly. And it applies to a different kind of colonization of the world, much later than the Spanish and Portuguese colonization of the Americas in the 16th century. So, on the one hand, we have the premise that Latin America itself was not liberated by the natives, but by the descendants of the Europeans. That makes the Latin American experience different, and some of the principles of post-colonial theory non-applicable to the Latin American reality. Then there was a response from scholars like Walter Mignolo and Ramon Grosfoguel and Castro Gomez in the 1990s and 2000s in Latin America, called the decolonial term, meaning that in order to decolonize the intellectual realm, instead of just seeing European or the Northern Hemisphere literature as the modelic literature, we had to go back to the indigenous oral knowledge and the indigenous culture, as they call it, the indigenous episteme, in order to really create a decolonial process of thought. My criticism of this framework is that there is very little field research. In Latin America alone, we have like 600 indigenous languages. That includes from Mexico to southern Chile and Argentina. Of those 600 languages, very few are known, and their systems of thought and their knowledge about the environment is being neglected. So I, in general, can agree with decolonial theory as a gesture, but what is produced in terms of new knowledge and new information about indigenous cultures is still very little, because most decolonial theorists don't speak indigenous languages and don't do fieldwork. They are basically renowned and respectful scholars who are talking from either important universities in the US or some of them in Latin America. But Latin America, as we know, is not all indigenous. No? There are the cities which are very westernized, and then there's the countryside, particularly the Amazon basin, where there are still many cultures that are completely different in many ways to what is considered a national identity in Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador. So that's in general my criticism of both post-colonial and decolonial theorists. I think there is much work to do. These theoretical frameworks can be useful as a general point of departure, but that's it. We need many teams of linguists, anthropologists, cultural theorists to work on the disappearing material. There's another question. Yeah, you.
What are the role of women in their family units? Because it seems like you guys were interviewing a lot of women.
Yes.
And not
In these cases, specifically because of the 5 elders that still survive from the 1959 split of the original community, 3 of them, and the 3 of them who are more lucid, are women. The ladies we saw, they're in their 70s and 80s. The 2 guys are older, and I think they have some moments of Alzheimer, in which they don't remember very well. And they are not able to dance and sing like the ladies do. So this is just a coincidence. But some of the old guys, Don José and Don Pablo are their names, can still speak Iskonawa, and sometimes they remember some tales of origin. Now, in terms of social structures, we cannot say a lot, because of what we have compiled information from anthropologists who have studied. For example, there was one anthropologist, Luis Whiteman, in the 1960s, who was able to contact the Iskonawa community in isolation and to depict their forms of family structure. It's still very much based on male domination. Women, for example, are forced to marry at a very early age, at 8, and they are mothers at 12. They basically limit themselves to cooking or fishing, while the men do the work of hunting. So it's not that different from many other indigenous communities in the Amazon. And there was another question. Yes.
Yeah, first, thanks for sharing this with us today. Thanks for coming to speak with us. I was wondering, could you think of other examples where around the world there's been other indigenous communities and a dominant culture, where the dominant cultures had the self-control to say, look, we're going to take these lands, have them off limits, and let them be preserved by the people who've been there for millennia? Are there other models that could possibly be followed in other places around the world that could apply to this?
Well, the phenomenon is global, unfortunately. It's going on in Africa, in Asia, regions with huge linguistic diversity like Papua New Guinea are suffering the entrance of big corporations to exploit natural resources with the complicity of the states, the national states. Latin America, unfortunately, is not big. The only variation to this model is state capitalism, like in the case of Bolivia, for example, or Ecuador, the so-called pink tide of Latin American politics. But this model still has conflicts with a lot of communities, because they're interested in basically taking over the exploitation of natural resources. In some cases, I have to say, like in Bolivia, for example, they tend to be a little bit more respectful, and they grant more rights and funds to indigenous communities, but still there is a process of imposition of the idea that progress is based on modern progress only. Alternative models of different forms of modernity, unfortunately, are not being practiced or supported by national states in Latin America that I know so far. Yes.
Yes, you mentioned before and inviting people here to support or advocate for this kind of research and this worldview. What can be done?
Apply for grants. I'm afraid that's the only way to go. And of course, try to get familiar with the knowledge, the existing bibliography. But probably more importantly, there is an element of activism in all this. We might want to rethink our way of practicing politics, not just by following CNN or voting every 2 or 4 years, but by getting involved with communities of immigrants, not only from Latin America, but from all over the world, because they might have contacts with communities in their countries of origin that may be very, very willing and very happy to cooperate in projects of documentation and revitalization. So there's a lot to do from the academic world still. I haven't lost that hope.
It seems like there's a natural alliance with environmental groups for preservation of these languages and cultures that you're both struggling against the exploitation and the damage to the environment. I wonder if that's in place, a kind of alliance with environmental groups to look at preservation of languages.
In some cases, but those groups are mostly interested in the environment itself. The academic side, it's probably what corresponds to us as scholars. So it has to be a cooperative effort with institutions. Well, I wouldn't say with Greenpeace, because Greenpeace, or at least in Peru, has committed a series of mistakes. For example, laying banners on archaeological sites. But there are other, in Peru alone, there is, for example, the Centro de Protección del Medio Ambiente, the Environment Protection Center, which is an NGO. So these are private initiatives that sometimes get funds from either the private sector or international agencies. And they help to, for example, implement solar panels in indigenous communities, or process of water purification. All that is very important for sure, and that's very much appreciated by indigenous communities. But those NGOs, as I mentioned, mostly interested in preserving the environment. The relationship between humans and the environment is what I would like to stress. Gina?
Yes, I'm wondering what the NSF's interest in this was. Was it purely intellectual? Was it culture, language? Right. Or is it, what's behind that?
Yeah, you're touching a very sensitive area there, because it's a federal agency. It's the U.S. Government behind this. What's their interest? Originally, we can accept that there is a genuine intellectual scholar interest. But ultimately, depends on how you use that knowledge, is what is going to count. So, for example, having dictionaries of Iskonawa, compilations of oral tradition, well, that is great, very beautiful, but if it's going to be used to infiltrate or neutralize these communities, then unfortunately, we're helping the enemy. To put it in some way, not that I'm the enemy of the US state, but of interest of big corporations that at the end, they just want to make profit out of these territories and peoples. So it's like a double game. We're using them with the risk that we know they might use us. But I don't see at the moment any other alternative. So it's hard to say. We're still living in reality, unfortunately. We wish there was an NSF with no political interest at all. That would be wonderful, but that would be a different world for all.
I have another question.
Sure.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the connection with this, because we have been listening about Iskonawa as a sort of like isolated community, but they are actually very integrated as well within the the big picture of what is Peru, the modern Peru, how they interconnect.
Yes, it's because there's two Iskonawa groups. So ones that left the original system of social system in 1959, of which there are still a few survivors. Those are the ones we work with. And then the community in voluntary isolation. The first group, the ones we work with, they had to learn Spanish. As you saw, they dress like Westerners. They have to deal every day with people who don't speak Iskonawa, mostly speak the Shipibo language, which is an indigenous language, still pretty much alive. There's like 30,000 speakers in the Pucallpa area. But those who live in voluntary isolation, they don't consider it, they probably, because I haven't talked to them, nobody has, very few people probably talk to them. Now they consider themselves Peruvians. Why should they? Peru is a modern invention for Brazilians. 500 years ago there was no Peru, no Brazil. So why should they identify themselves with those national states that unfortunately have supported and implemented constant penetration and exploitation of their lands? To the point that, for example, with the process of deforestation, let's mention the case of Brazil, with their aggressive farming policies. They level the jungle, they create pastures for cows or for soy cultivation. There is therefore less trees, less animals who might live in those jungles, less hunting and less food for the human communities that were living there before. So these communities have to come out. Sometimes it has been the case of the Ashcopido, in the border between Peru and Brazil, in the southern part, in Madre de Dios, that have to come out begging for food to the loggers and the privateers. It's very saddening. We are basically killing them slowly, but we are, well, not literally, but the Western components of the Brazilian or the Peruvian societies.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Yeah. So it seems that when you're talking about, especially for the end about Arguedas and Congo, that there seems to be a kind of desire to, I guess, to influence or transform the sort of way Latin America is studied, the way Peruvian literature is studied. I'm curious, given sort of, given this research and given sort of an idea that this sort of research is necessary, what your sort of ideal vision of like a sort of canon of the verbal arts, let's say, would look like?
Good question. Yeah, my approach to authors like Arguedas and Calvo was basically like a detour of the main argument of the talk. Just to mention that I'm a literary scholar and I have some training in linguistics. Now, one of my majors in college was linguistics also. In addition to knowing the languages, documenting their cultures, I think there is a supplement that literary people, writers or even scholars, could benefit from, which is the huge vitality and the imagination, the richness of the oral tradition of these indigenous communities. And my point is basically that a lot of Latin American writers could really have a wonderful source of inspiration and of verbal material by accessing these oral traditions, just like Arguedas and Calvo did. This has behind the silent polemic with writers that are much more established or prestigious, like Vargas Llosa, for example, to name another Peruvian writer, who basically write about urban or middle class problematic that could probably represent some sectors of society, but unfortunately not the sectors that would be most interested in empowering indigenous communities. So there is a political move behind literary criticism also, and the advocacy for kind of literature that acknowledges at least the importance of this verbal tradition that is being lost. So it's more or less like the context of my mention of Calvin, I guess. And thanks for the question.
There one more question there? Yeah.
That's actually two.
Okay. Yeah.
Where does the novel The Lost Steps by Elena Carpentier fit into this?
Oh.
As you were speaking, I was taking that stairway up to the natural space in Latin America, and I was thinking, how would that fit in?
Yeah, it's a beautiful novel, Pasos Perdidos. Carpentier, who lived in Venezuela for a while, he was a writer who was very interested in these topics. As part of 1930s to 1950s initiative of some writers before the literary so-called boom of Latin American novel, were very concerned about indigenous subjects. One case is, for example, Carpentier, who was Cuban, but another one is Miguel Ángel Asturias from Guatemala. These are two people of writers that unfortunately they're not being taught very much today. They're kind of forgotten. Even in Latin America there are not many editions of these writers. But this is the kind of model that definitely would fit into this proposal. Carpentier, although he was not a specialist in indigenous languages or the Venezuelan, Amazonian communities, he had a huge knowledge of anthropology. He has books on music, African music in Cuba, for example. He was a kind of intellectual writer that was multidisciplinary. So that's a kind of model of intellectual that we unfortunately are losing in Latin America. Most novelists today are obsessed with editorial success only.
Okay. Okay. Muchas gracias.